The speedrunning scene for the first 3 Zelda games are highly competitive, with a history going back to at least 2001. This means that new records in the trilogy these days are not common as a result. But on September 1st of 2022, Zelda 2 history was made with a run that would clock in at just under 16 minutes by runner Slackanater. This record is the result of over 3 decades worth of hard work, collaboration in a tight-knit community, and most importantly, a runner finding a glitch while playing Zelda 2 with his, feet? Before going into how runners make an accomplishment like this happen, we first need to look at the game's intended route. The goal of Zelda 2 is fairly simple overall. Zelda got hit with a pretty powerful sleeping spell before the game starts, and Link needs to go on an adventure to wake her up. So he takes 6 crystals he receives from Impa to various palaces throughout the world, and inserts them into statues hidden within. Once done, the Great Palace is unlocked and Link must face off against his doppelganger to earn the Triforce of Courage. Unfortunately, this seemingly quick route is betrayed by the difficulty the game is known for in both the casual and speedrunning communities. Unforgiving screens make it difficult for any player to avoid damage, and with minimal health upgrades, Link is one hit away from death at almost any given time. However, death is just one of the many walls that can keep a runner from a new personal best. Zelda 2 is riddled with glitches and exploits that require frame-perfect precision to pull off, and if you miss any one of these, you can kiss the record goodbye. The first run killer comes up surprisingly fast, just under 30 seconds in. Requiring 2 different 1/60th of a second inputs, the healer glitch has been the bane of those in the community wanting to take on Zelda 2's any percent category. Believe it or not, many of you may actually know about where this exploit takes you already. With its debut in the June 1989 issue of Nintendo Power, Agent number 529 revealed several exploits still used by runners today, including one called Glitch Town. Glitch Town is where you go after performing the healer glitch, and it's the reason why any percent is so broken. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's look at how runners make their entrance. Talking to the healer lady in Raru on one specific frame makes her turn around, and on the last frame before she opens the door, the healer turns around again and walks away. This allows the player to take advantage of some really weird mechanics. This is thanks to the action that happens when talking to NPCs that open doors. For this example, talking to the healer creates an open door, and at a certain point, the healer overrides this door's behavior to not let Link exit the area. So if Link interrupts the healer at a specific time, the healer never overrides the door and Link can use it to exit the area. Usually, doors are assigned target scenes in the game, sending you to that scene after entering said door. But what if you had a door without a target? Well, you get transported to the game's default scene, 00. This scene looks like the left side of Raru Town, but it's not connected to any of its other scenes. As a result, this lets runners do some cool stuff with the town. Leaving the town from the left allows the player to exit to the overworld location they were at before entering the town. However, when exiting the glitch town to the right, the game will move you down one spot on the list of overworld locations. As a result of this, Link comes out of the King's Tomb, which is all the way down there. This skips a couple of early game events, but it most importantly opens the path for early hammer, which lets runners break overworld rocks much earlier than intended. 6 years ago to the day of this writing, legendary Zelda 2 runner Crystal Saver was doing a run of Zelda 2 with his feet as a challenge playthrough. While footage of this run no longer exists, we can look at a recreation of the event from another runner. On this screen during his attempt, he turned into a fairy to dodge some of the Garus that were throwing stones at him. When going left and moving back to the right, he moved too far and his sprite moved off screen. While this was odd, moving back to the right in order to progress caused something incredible to happen. The Saver warped back to the overworld, but amazingly the game placed him after the encounter tile. Another runner by the name of UnosXX was watching while this happened, and he quickly worked to understand how this was possible. The same day, another veteran in the community, Prez J Polk, would post a video explaining the glitch and share it with the Zelda 2 community. If you turn into a fairy and do single frame taps towards the edge of the screen, you can move in such a way that the fairy disappears. At this point in moving, the game is in a state where it detects the velocity of whatever direction you're going in. So on the first frame of your next left or right button press, the game checks which way you're moving, and then puts you ahead or behind the encounter tile. With that being said, you're probably wondering, how do we get from this to something like this? The bridge going to the east of Death Mountain is not a walk in the park by any means, with the first screen not only containing bubbles that hurt Link when touched, but also powerful Dyra that can throw unblockable projectiles. The second screen had a more consistent strategy to push through it, but the first screen was dependent on specific RNG to clear the area fast with minimal damage. This was a problem that Slackanater wanted to solve, so he had the idea to use fairy feet on the first part of the bridge. Unfortunately, there was another issue with this, and it has to do with this magic meter. Many of the tricks coming up require high-level management of Link's magic. This means that every spell used matters, and using each one perfectly is essential to obtaining a top time. Using fairy at this point would mess with the magic route, and there's currently no way to fix it without losing a ton of time. A friend of Slackanater's who is known for diving into and dissecting games, FrostedPears, has suggested he should do something different. He suggested he should do the trick without the fairy spell, but this is much easier said than done. Doing the trick with the one-frame taps like fairy feet not only wouldn't work right off the bat, but it also requires a specific alignment with the value smaller than a pixel called a subpixel. This is due to how movement works in Zelda 2. For every frame you hold a direction, Link's subpixel speed increases by 1 with a maximum value of positive or negative 24, relative to Link's direction. This is kind of like a car slowly building up speed after putting your foot on the gas. If you let go of the direction you're moving at any given point, Link's subpixel speed decreases by 1 per frame until hitting 0. Think of this as if you were taking your foot off the gas in your car. Now there are 16 subpixels in a single pixel, so it's possible to move without it even being visible on screen. This is where the problem starts to show up. In order to make use of the skip, the player's velocity needed to be in the opposite direction of the exit on the frame after exiting. Thankfully, when moving in the opposite direction of Link's current velocity, the subpixel speed changes to 2 per frame, but it still presents a massive challenge of getting Link to the last pixel and subpixel before exiting the area. This strategy that Pears described sounds like it would be task only, and in most cases that would be correct. However, there's one thing about Slackanater we haven't mentioned yet. Zelda 2 isn't his only speed game. In fact, he performed a much more difficult challenge not too long ago with Ninja Gaiden, being the first person ever to complete the game without taking damage. So when it came to Pears asking him if he could make the subpixel alignment and the next frame direction change happen, Slackanater would give his reply in a very interesting way. While attending Retro Gaming Expo on the weekend of August 27th, Slackanater hooked his NES up to the hotel room TV and got to work on the challenge that Pears presented. After hours of grinding and testing different setups, Slackanater was able to skip Bridge Trap 9 Beta. He used the strategy of lining up Link's subpixels by holding left and releasing on a certain visual cue, then turning around and performing an attack on the last possible moment before exiting the screen. When Link performs his stab attack, his speed immediately drops to 0. An incredible tool that lets players have precise control over Link's movement. Slackanater and Pears were exhilarated about getting this to work, but performing this in a run was a completely different beast. So after returning from the convention, Slackanater took to his live stream and started grinding attempts with the new exploit. On the same day, he was already working the trick into runs, consistently saving time against his PB. Compared to the previous record from another Zelda 2 runner by the name of Light, this saved a whole 8 seconds. Now I know this doesn't sound like much, but when a game is as optimized as this one, minor time saves can mean a world of difference when chasing a new record. That's why the next major piece of speedrunning tech isn't a massive glitch, warp, or anything else of the sort. It's a product of pure skill and awareness of how enemies work in Zelda 2. Let's talk about how the game handles iframes. Iframes, or invincibility frames, are something almost every gamer should be familiar with. It takes some damage, and you usually have an invulnerability period before you can be hit again. However, in the context of Zelda 2, our iframes are not the only factor here. Landing a hit on an enemy causes them to go into a state where they can't interact with Link for a couple of seconds. This is extremely useful in preventing damage and skipping unnecessary fights. But enemies make taking advantage of this a little more complicated. Ever wonder why fighting certain enemies can be so difficult in Zelda 2? So difficult it just makes you want to quit playing the game? Well, it's not just you, and unfortunately I have to say the game is out to get you. Okay, maybe not you, but your controller is the real target here. The enemy AI in the game works off the inputs directing Link's actions. So for example, if you're approaching an enemy and you decide to jump over them, they will back up and try to body block you, inflicting damage in exchange for skipping the fight. In normal circumstances, not even using the iframe mechanic would prevent Link from taking damage, as the iframes would expire while the enemy is backing up. But what if you could trick the monster into not moving backwards? That would remove some of the risk from trying to go faster. This was another idea that Slackanater had when pushing towards sub 16 minutes, and he managed to work in a really clever strategy called neutral jumping. When moving on the ground in Zelda 2, if you release the direction you're moving in, you slow down to a stop. Now if you perform a jump before letting go of the direction you're holding, you'll continue to move at the same speed before your jump until you hit the ground. While doing this neutral jump towards an enemy, their AI won't be reading anything from your D-pad, so they won't back away from you until you hit the D-pad in their direction again. Knowing this, a well-timed set of attacks will put the enemy into an iframe state, and Link can slip past the monster without taking damage. This not only allows Slackanater to clear some sections faster than the previous record, but this allows for one less level up overall in the run. Normally in Spectacle Cave, where runners get the hammer, more enemies are defeated so that life level 2 can be attained, meaning less damage is taken, and players get a health refill before reaching the hammer. Normally this would be done to eat some damage near the end of the cave, but since Slackanater took no damage before this point, life 2 wasn't needed. The amount of technical skill required to do all that without taking additional damage is astounding to me, and it goes to show how much this game demands from the player. What's really amazing about all this is that it took only 2.5 minutes to reach the hammer using these strategies. Thankfully, things from here wind down a little, where the route collects items, spells, and sword techniques from various places. This is done quickly thanks to the up A warping via a second controller. However, this category requires players to perform another run-killing trick about 7.5 minutes in. The healer glitch is needed to get back to Glitch Town one more time, but since Slack has the hammer, it's not needed to reach the King's Tomb. It's actually meant to activate one of the most broken glitches in the game, allowing most encounters to be finished within seconds. This is scroll locking, and its effects are absolutely worth the double frame perfect inputs needed to use it. As the name implies, the game's scrolling mechanic when Link moves far enough left or right locks up, and as a result can make some really weird things happen. This is thanks to entering a door that has no target 5 separate times. When you enter a door, the game remembers where you came from so it can send you back to that location when you exit. The game basically only has 2 slots of memory for this door info, so entering 3 or more doors flows that data into memory right next to it, causing it to be overwritten, and this part of the memory happens to be responsible for how side-scrolling behaves. The glitch first surfaced in a Task Videos forum thread, where it was mentioned by veteran taster Insult while mid-production of a Zelda 2 tool-assisted speedrun, and its effects are absolutely wild. When entering a room from the left, scrolling works as normal with the glitch. On the other side of things, however, this trick shortens single rooms immensely by treating the scene as the first area on the left side when entering from the right. Another cool effect is when you enter an area, scroll the screen slightly to the right in this state, and then exit, you don't use the normal exit assigned to the end of the room. This can allow the player to end up in weird locations depending on the area they're in. Caves lead back to an overworld location, and palaces will send you up or down a room, kinda like if you took one of the elevators. I'll break down the mechanic of room scenes later, as there's another glitch that takes advantage of rooms near the end of the game. Many any% runs use this to blaze through the rest of the game, first going through Palace 2 to grab the Handy Glove, which lets Link break stone blocks, and then onward to Death Mountain. This short trek through the mountain serves multiple purposes, both of which are revealed when the player reaches Spectacle Rock. In the small cave lies a magic potion which increases your maximum magic by 1 bar. This is super useful because it keeps runners from having to level up constantly throughout the run. Besides getting levels being slow, we'll see in just a little bit as to why this is so important. However, there's one more thing that Spectacle Rock does for us. Remember what I said about scroll locking giving caves weird overworld exits? It just so happens that exiting Spectacle Rock after the slight scroll puts Link in the labyrinth, an incredibly convenient point for the speedrun. Runners only need to make one quick stop in the maze to grab another magic upgrade, and it's go time for the Great Palace section thanks to a couple more cave warps due to scroll locking. Before we move on though, let's look at a little more history of the route. Preparation for the Great Palace used to include more stops before runners realized grinding out levels was extremely slow. In mid-2021, a runner by the name of LSD Hippie 420 provided what would be the biggest change in years to the Any% route by suggesting that runners grab all the magic upgrades and only level up to Magic 3 instead of Magic 5. This kept runners from grinding an additional 1900 experience in Kasuto Forest, and also eliminated the need for any RNG based drops in the Great Palace. This took the record from just under 18 minutes all the way down to around 16:30 with the changes, which was awesome because no major changes had been made to Any% for years at that point. Unfortunately, there was one glaring problem with the route that no one wanted to tackle. Many level ups were eliminated, but it was found that in order to push the record down further, more of these level ups and detours needed to be removed. After some testing, runners found that they only needed Magic 1 and 7 bars of magic going into Great Palace. And we'll explore why that is as we dive into the final part of this impossible run. The Great Palace is known for being the longest and most difficult dungeon in the game, and even with the scroll lock glitch, it is a massive wall to anyone who wants to use this specific route. When talking with Slackanater, he mentioned that if you even managed to perform everything correctly, your run still had a 90% chance of failure before reaching the final boss from things outside of your control. GP is filled with enemies that can take out Link with a single hit, and not to dinner I'm afraid. So runners have to carefully dodge not only visible enemies, but ones hidden behind parts of the screen that are glitched due to the scroll lock. Like previous areas, there are also many pits in this dungeon hidden by the same glitch, so runners need to memorize exact jump points to avoid falling into lava. Slackanater also has to deal with the 50% chance red magic jar drop due to a firebird he can't consistently dodge. Using fairy to fly over the enemy does have a high magic cost, but it's much safer than not doing so. There's another section not far off this one where he has to fairy again, but this strategy is done by most runners as dodging the firebird in this room isn't fast or consistent. With the use of fairy though, runners don't have enough magic to do one of the most important tricks in a run, so they take a death in this room with several lava pits. This puts all of Link's meters back to full after respawning, and with a little more progression through the palace, we reach one of the most difficult rooms in the run. Normally in this room, Link would need to fall down one of the holes in the middle of the room to reach the floor where the Thunderbird is located. However, there is a massive problem with this. Besides a Thunderbird fight being really slow, the route left out the one thing that lets runners even attempt the fight: the Thunder Spell. This is where that entire room comes into play. Runners need 8 bars of magic to perform an upcoming glitch, 3 bars for the jump spell, and 5 for the fairy spell. As you can see by Slack's magic bar, he only has 7 bars total. So how does he manage to work with that? There are these spiky enemies on the bridge called Mew, and they have a chance to drop a blue magic jar, which restores 1 bar of magic. Because of this, in the blocks in the Great Palace, runners grabbed the down thrust sword tech from Mido Town earlier. So not only does Slackanater have to kill the Mew, he needs a blue jar to drop from it. He also has to position himself on a piece of the bridge to where it doesn't crumble beneath him. Even with all this combined, that's not even the craziest part about this strategy. The upcoming glitch is a warp that is activated by using fairy at the very top of the screen. It's an exploit that makes Link fall to the room exactly below him in the palace. The Any% run requires this to be done twice in a row, and amazingly Slackanater has planned for this throughout the entire run. Every enemy that Slackanater defeated was on purpose, and resulted in him having 92 XP when entering this horrible room. Each Mew gives 10 XP when defeated without an item drop, so Slackanater needs to kill 1 more in order to get a level up right after casting fairy to do the warp. However, getting this enemy to cooperate is a lot easier said than done. The Mew has a 50% chance to move in either direction in accordance with its movement AI, and runners wanted to move to the right for a specific setup. This used to be a lot more difficult, and pretty much a one-try trick if you weren't careful. Thankfully, Slackanater not only found a way to get the Mew to respawn after a failed jump, but he also accidentally found out how to quickly get the Mew in position to do the ceiling warp after hours of practice and strat hunting. At one point in him labbing out the room, he noticed that after accidentally getting hit, the Mew chased him across the bridge. This is due to the enemy AI detecting that a block was breaking underneath it, so the enemy starts moving constantly to the right until it reaches one that isn't breaking. It was then that Slackanater had a genius idea to use this in his strategy. There's a certain point in the room where it lines up with another portion of the room below. This has to do with a mechanic that separates rooms or scenes into several sections or pages. Displaced Gamers has an excellent video explaining this concept in detail, and it helped me understand how all of this works. FrostedPears also has great documentation on this mechanic if reading is more up your alley. Back to the trick though, to do the warp properly and skip Thunderbird, runners need to get the Mew in position, not break the bridge block, and warp at the correct point to end up in the ceiling of the page underneath the current one. This also leads into the reason why the level up timing is so important. The warp needs to be done one more time from the next room to reach the final boss, and it can't happen without that extra magic. From there, it's just a matter of defeating Link's evil shadow, Dark Link. Dark Link can easily give runners a hard time by blocking attacks and even just sitting still, so the best strategy is just to sit on the far left edge of the screen and react to his attacks. That's enough from me though, let's see how Slackanater handles this fight.
I don't want to look! I don't want to look! Fucking did it! Oh my god! Oh!
After pushing through the frame-perfect tricks and questionable RNG, Slackanater obtained a time of 15:59.992, almost half a frame away from missing the 15-minute achievement. This was incredible, as the community wasn't even sure if yet another minute barrier could be broken, especially after the time was pushed under 17 minutes just a year prior. When talking about the run-in strategies with Slackanater, he said that while this was an amazing achievement, it's still possible to save time due to some unfortunate enemy RNG. However, he did confirm he didn't want to be the one to chase the record. Slackanater said that he doesn't bring down his own records, keeping things fresh and allowing the thrill of community competition to keep it fun for himself. I was going to have another blurb in here about how Slackanater was working on another Zelda 2 project, but literally this morning while I was revising the script, Slackanater finished a damageless run of Zelda 2 with the help of FrostedPears. The fact that he did this in just half a month after getting the any % record is honestly one of the greatest achievements to happen in modern day speedrunning. So if you want to watch this highly skilled and charismatic gamer, go follow him on Twitch and subscribe to his YouTube channel. He'll be working on Link to the Past damageless next, so you'll have plenty of cool stuff to watch. Also, speaking of FrostedPears, his documentation helped me understand and explain what's happening in most of the run, so this video wouldn't be possible without it. Go check out his website that I linked below for all this information and more. The story of how runners conquered Zelda 2's hardest speedrun in just 15 minutes is one of the wildest I've told on the channel so far. And despite it not being the most popular Zelda game, the fact that there's a passionate community of gamers out there willing to take it on is really cool to me. Speaking of really cool, make sure you all stay hydrated, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the videos, subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. And if you want to help support me financially, head over to my Patreon where I post updates on upcoming projects. You also get your name mentioned at the end of videos like this one. Thanks again everyone.